Parcel now has support for React Server components. Yes, the Parcel that's a build tool similar to Vite or Webpack. Wait, does that mean it's a framework now? Anyway, it's currently in beta, so not ready for production use. But it's nice to see that Next.js and Waku aren't the only frameworks that support it. So if you've been avoiding React Server components because they're too complicated and you're hoping Parcel has made it simpler, well, they're still a bit complicated. I mean, Parcel has support for server actions and streaming in server components, which we'll look at later, but it does it a bit differently from the others. Let me show you. Here is a super basic server component example where everything is initially rendered on the server and the interactivity here comes from the client. Pretty cool, right? This works by first setting the server file, which is a basic Express app that renders the page component using the render request function. There is support for other servers like Bun, Dino, and Cloudflare workers, but in my experience, Express works the best so far. Anyway, moving on. So the page component is a React component with more of a full page layout with the HTML head and title tag. It renders the counter components down here and has the use server entry directive, which is specific to Parcel, and simply means that this server component is a root or page entry point, and so Parcel knows to bundle it and its dependencies together for easy code splitting. The counter component has the standard use client directive, meaning it should be rendered on the client, but there's also this client import in the page component, which has the use client entry directive and just runs the hydrate function from Parcel. Again, this is a Parcel specific component that simply means this code will run once in the browser on page load, and this enables the counter component to work. But this can also do a bunch of cool things like intercept the click event to trigger client-side navigation, which makes navigating feel smoother instead of doing a full page reload. And the final piece of the puzzle is to update the package JSON file with this code, which builds this source as a React server and outputs it to this location. You could also add a React client here, use React static for static rendering, or just mix static and dynamic rendering together. Wow, all of this for a page with a counter. I guess it is a bit more minimal than Next.js, right? Oh yeah, there's also server actions. Okay, remember this client.js file I spoke about earlier? Well, the hydrate function can accept a call server function, which in this case is making a post request to the root and passing in the header of the React server component action ID and a body of arguments using the fetch RSC function. I'll talk about this later, but in the server file, if we have a post endpoint to that same root and grab the ID, we can pass it into this call action function, which is coming from Parcel. The page component here is triggering that post call when a user submits this form. And when it does that, it runs this page action, which simply gets the form data, grabs the name from the form data, and adds it to memory, which can be picked up by this function that's called up here and added to the bottom of the form. Then in the server, the page is re-rendered and passed back to the client, which uses this information to update the root of the page, meaning typing something into here gets printed onto this page without refreshing the whole site. Okay, let's circle back to this fetch RSC function, which simply gets a server component payload instead of rendering it as HTML. This is useful for getting components from the server to prevent network waterfalls, which is different from lazy loading a component, because a lazy loaded component will still need to get data if necessary and re-render, but a component from the server will come with the data already, preventing an unnecessary re-render. And that's it, a quick run through of React Server components in Parcel. It's a cool implementation, but I'm not a huge fan of all the random bits of JavaScript that come with server components. Kind of makes me wish that web components were more popular.